because Previn really had left a void by the abruptness of his leaving. And when he was hired, and when he accepted the job as full-time music director, he had seen me work a couple of times and met me and wanted me then as full-time assistant conductor. But that was a couple of years later.
So what did you take away from him?
I think Laurent Mazel is the most professional Kapellmeister. That means the conductor that knows the craft and the art of conducting there is in the world. His rehearsal planning, his stick technique, his ear, his never wasting a minute of a musician's time, his enthusiasm and dynamic on the podium, which is often, not anymore, but back then was often misinterpreted as vanity and posing. It's not. He's just a very elegant conductor, that's all. His being a music director, which is a completely different kettle of fish than being a conductor. The skills that you need to have to be a music director, Lauren is a virtuoso in that too. Dealing with boards, going out, giving interviews, being a figurehead for the orchestra. His work in the recording studio, which is brilliant. He's a recording artist, and I mean the way he spans and spreads out a recording session is just perfect. And I've just seen him in New York and talked to a couple of members of the orchestra, some of them being ex-members of the Milwaukee Symphony. Right. And it was those things that I just mentioned that they adore about him too, and that I know the Pittsburgh Symphony adored throughout his whole tenure there.
Musically, was he an influence?
Less so.
Yeah.
Because his great specialities, I would say, back then, they've changed a little bit. Conductors change through their life, which is a fact that orchestra players not often recognize. But musicians, conductors are different in every decade of their life. When I met him and worked with him, I think what he did incredible was French repertory, Stravinsky, Prokofiev. Not so much, I mean, he did very good Beethoven and Brahms, but not as good as it does it now, I think. And that back then and now is what I love the best. So I always enjoyed watching him doing these things, but musically he was not such a big influence. Richard Strauss, for example, he was a good influence. And later, when he went to Munich, funny enough, one of my favorite composers, Bruckner, became something that he did really well, and I think right now he's one of the finest Bruckner conductors around. Yes.
Interesting. No, that's not something one would have predicted 20, 30 years ago.
This is why I say, you know, one has to be always prepared for the fact that a conductor changes even in his 7th and 8th decade of life, and something that I didn't expect from Lauren, and certainly didn't see him doing so much in in Pittsburgh, is something that he does a lot now and does extremely well, and that's Bruckner.
Is there a conductor that you think of as a model, or there are thought of as being schools? There's kind of a Koussevitzky school. There's a very famous diagram that's actually in our library of Koussevitzky and all the conductors that studied with him or studied with people that studied with him. It's really too big to say that it's a Koussevitzky school, but there was a Montreux whole tradition of people. Is there anything that you relate to in that way?
There's a couple of conductors that through their recordings and what I've seen on video impressed me very much and influenced me a little bit in my thinking. One is Otto Klemperer, who I think in the Germanic repertory that has always been the center of what I do, is incredible. Because the mix of being authentic and clear and not doing strange, weird things, but on the other hand being so free and so improvisatory with it. It always sounds so rhapsodic when he does Beethoven, like inventing it on the spur of the moment, and Brahms too. Yet if you look at it with the score, he doesn't do anything that's not there. He doesn't add any weird things. And towards the end of his life, after he had several strokes, it was a little bit more difficult. But when he was in his prime, when he was 40 and 50, during the years that he ran the Kroll Opera in Berlin, and those recordings and early videos I find quite incredible, and I've known them a long time and always come back as saying this is somebody that I'd love to have met. Unfortunately I didn't. And somebody that I got to see later in my life, again only through videos, is Georges Sell, who I know was not very popular with musicians, or I've heard that.
Well, he was not. He was a difficult boss, although it was a different time, obviously.
But I think his conducting is unbelievably clear. His rehearsals that I've seen a couple on video are very inspiring and very clear. He knows so much what he wants, and he gets it so well. And I don't like to watch him so much because he looks a little, I don't know, body language I find a little edgy. But the eyes, people always say Fritz Reiner controlled the orchestra with his eyes, and I agree that, but it scares me. I could not play a note under Fritz Reiner.
There's a wonderful, have you seen that, the Great Conductors video, I think, tells it, and there's a shot of, from the bass section, of Reiner conducting Chicago, and at one point he turns and stares at the basses, and it's exactly like something out of Jurassic Park, where the velociraptor is focused in on his prey, and he almost doesn't look human.
No, he glares, he really glares, and I don't know, I couldn't play with that. But Sell, I thought, looks firm and strict, but also inspiring at the same time. He has these, I think they were blue, I cannot see in the old black and white videos, but very bright eyes, and I feel, if I imagine I would be a musician under Sell, I feel guided yet inspired at the same time. Of the living conductors, much harder. When he was alive, he was dead, but only recently, Carlos Kleiber was just an incredible conductor and such an inspiring rehearsal.
Von Karajan, not so much?
Von Karajan, yes. But I saw him mostly when he was older, and when the relationship between him and the Berlin Philharmonic had started to get a little iffy.
Right.
What I remember from Karajan was when I saw him rehearsing on tour, amazed me a lot. I saw him a couple of times in New York, preparing the orchestra for the evening performance of a Brahms symphony, which he and the orchestra have done hundreds of times. Yet he would spend an hour on one little detail, which I thought was amazing. I remember him doing the beginning of Brahms 4. For the whole first half of the rehearsal, 1 hour, 15 minutes, the first 8 bars.
Do you think that was a technique to get the orchestra's attention in a sense?
Yes,
or
definitely.
It was not just so much about those bars, it was just about raising the standard.
Attention, to keep it fresh. He rethought it. I think I've seen conduct Karajan Brahms Symphony with Berlin Philharmonic many times. It was always a little different. He rethought it constantly. The changes were subtle, just for us people to hear, not really for the audience.
Right.
But they were there, and it kept it fresh and it kept it inspiring. I also remember from Karajan that although he was a real maestro, in how he posed and how he conducted himself, he really let the orchestra play much more than people gave him credit for. I remember the end of Brahms 1. He launched it in so it wouldn't fall apart, and then he leaned back and let the orchestra play and enjoy it by themselves. That was something that people didn't realize about him, but I think the players, after he was gone, realized what a wonderful gift that was, that he guided them through the difficult passages where they needed to be shown and where they needed clarity. But then when it came to the climax and to just let it go, he basically stayed out of the way.
I have a friend who studied with Monteux and quoted Monteux saying that conducting is sometimes like riding a horse, whereas the horse sometimes needs you, a lot of the time doesn't, and part of conducting is figuring out which is which.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Knowing, behaving appropriately.
Yeah. One conductor who's very good, and I should mention, because I haven't mentioned a single living conductor, Dohnányi is very good at that. I was Dohnányi's student at the Hamburg Conservatory, and we stayed in touch over the years. So I saw him a couple of times with Cleveland, and I just saw him last week with his new orchestra, the Hamburg Radio Orchestra. And he has a wonderful way of being very, very specific and very helpful in rehearsal, and really, he worked on intonation for an hour. But that's what they needed at that rehearsal. It was Bartók and Mozart. And then the concert was so free and so inspiring because they felt they had raised a level in rehearsal and enjoyed that feeling in the concert.
Right. I'm